Did you know the longest and deadliest family feud in Texas history resulted in dozens of murders? Welcome back, everyone. Today we're talking about the bloody feud of the Sutton-Taylor clan, Texas, 1866. The Civil War had ended barely a year before, but peace had not come with it. Instead, the South simmered with bitterness, humiliation, and violence. Union soldiers patrolled the countryside, carpetbagger officials enforced new laws, and in DeWitt County, Texas, old loyalties ran deep. It was here, in the rolling prairies and oak-lined rivers near Cuero, that two names would become forever stained with blood: Sutton and Taylor. What began as a single quarrel would spiral into a war lasting nearly a decade, with ambushes, assassinations, lynchings, and whole towns under siege. By the time it ended, dozens of men lay dead, and the Sutton-Taylor feud had secured its place as the longest and bloodiest family feud in Texas history. The roots of hatred, 1866-1868. The Taylors were no ordinary family. They were descendants of Josiah Taylor, a Virginian who had settled in DeWitt County before Texas had even joined the Union. His sons, Pitkin and Creed Taylor, raised strong-willed, hard-riding children who grew up in the Confederate cause. They despised Reconstruction authorities and vowed never to bow to Union-backed lawmen. The Suttons, by contrast, stood on the other side. William E. Sutton, originally from Fayette County, had become a deputy sheriff and aligned himself with the Texas State Police, a force organized under Republican Governor Edmund J. Davis to enforce order. The Taylors saw them as nothing but oppressors. The first sparks came quickly. In 1866, Buck Taylor shot a black sergeant who dared to attend a dance at his uncle's home. Soon after, Hayes Taylor killed a black soldier in an Indianola saloon. By 1867, brothers Hayes and Dobie Taylor ambushed and killed two Union soldiers near Mason. Each killing drew the attention of Union officials. Each killing hardened the lines between the Taylors and the law. Then came William Sutton. In March 1868, Sutton led a posse chasing horse thieves. Among those accused was Charlie Taylor, a distant relative of the DeWitt County Taylors. The chase ended in Bastrop, where Sutton killed Charlie in the street and later shot another prisoner, James Sharp, claiming he tried to escape. To the Taylors, this wasn't justice, it was murder. To Sutton, it was the law. The fuse was lit. The first blood, Christmas Eve 1868, Clinton, Texas, Christmas Eve. The town was alive with music, whiskey, and rowdy cowboys celebrating the holiday. Inside one saloon, Buck Taylor and Dick Chisholm confronted William Sutton over the sale of some horses. Words grew hot. Accusations of dishonesty flew, and in an instant, guns were drawn. When the smoke cleared, Buck Taylor and Dick Chisholm lay dead. William Sutton had killed again. This, the Taylors declared, was the true beginning of the feud, and from that moment on, neither family would ever forgive the other. State Police and Blood Justice, 1869-1870. The feud might have remained a private quarrel had it not been for Captain Jack Helm. A former Confederate turned Union-backed lawman, Helm commanded the Texas State Police. With Sutton and other loyalists like Jim Cox and Joe Tumlinson at his side, Helm launched brutal campaigns against suspected cattle thieves, most of them Taylor allies. On August 23, 1869, a posse ambushed and killed Hayes Taylor. A year later, the most shocking crime of all occurred. On August 26, 1870, Henry and William Kelly, both sons-in-law of Pitkin Taylor, were arrested on a trivial charge. Instead of being taken to court, they were marched a few miles from home and shot in cold blood. Hidden nearby, Mrs. Henry Kelly watched her husband murdered before her eyes. To the Taylors, it was no longer about disputes or pride. It was a war for survival. Pitkin Taylor's death, 1872. By 1872, Sutton had risen as the leader of the Union-backed faction, while the Taylors seethed with rage. That summer, Sutton's men devised a cruel trick. One night, they lured old Pitkin Taylor from his home by ringing a cowbell in his cornfield. When the elderly man stepped outside, he was ambushed and riddled with bullets. Though he survived the initial wounds, Pitkin died 6 months later. At his funeral, his son Jim Taylor stood before the mourners, his eyes burning with fury. "They will pay," he swore. And with those words, the feud escalated into open war. The war intensifies. 1873. On April 1, 1873, Jim Taylor made his first move. He and several allies ambushed Sutton in a Cuero saloon, firing through the door. Sutton was badly wounded, but survived. Undeterred, the Taylors struck again in June, killing Jim Cox, one of Sutton's closest men. But the most infamous killing came a month later. In July 1873, Jim Taylor and outlaw John Wesley Hardin cornered Captain Jack Helm in a blacksmith shop in Wilson County. Helm, once feared across the region, barely had time to reach for his gun before Hardin and Taylor cut him down in a hail of bullets. The feud had now claimed one of the most notorious lawmen in Texas, and the killing only fueled the fire. All-out war, 1873-1874. After Helm's death, DeWitt County descended into chaos. In December 1873, Wiley Pridgeon, a Taylor supporter, was gunned down in Thomaston. Enraged, Jim Taylor led his men into Cuero, where they besieged Sutton supporters for an entire day and night. Gunfire cracked across the streets, families huddled in fear inside their homes, and Cuero became a battlefield. When the sheriff intervened, both sides signed a temporary truce, but no one believed it would last. By early 1874, ambushes and retaliations were almost daily. Neighbors took sides. Ranches were burned. Men rode with rifles across the countryside, watching the roads for enemies. The feud had consumed the entire county. The assassination of William Sutton, March 11, 1874. William Sutton had had enough. Wounded, hunted, and weary of bloodshed, he decided to leave Texas. On March 11, 1874, he boarded a steamer at Indianola, bound for Galveston. Beside him was his friend Gabriel Slaughter. But as the ship prepared to depart, two horsemen galloped up the dock, Jim Taylor and Bill Taylor. Before Sutton could react, pistols roared. He and Slaughter fell dead on the planks of the wharf, their blood staining the Gulf tide. The leader of the Sutton faction was gone, but the feud was far from over. Revenge and lynchings, 1874-1875. The Suttons struck back with fury. On June 20, 1874, three young cowboys, Cute Tuggle, Jim White, and Scrap Taylor, were arrested in Hamilton on charges of cattle theft. All three were allied with the Taylors and were driving cattle for none other than John Wesley Hardin. That night, they were taken from the courthouse in Clinton and lynched by Sutton sympathizers. Their guilt was doubtful, but their deaths were certain. The cycle of murder continued. Captain Leander McNelly and his Texas Rangers were dispatched to DeWitt County to restore order. But even the Rangers, hardened as they were, could not stamp out the hatred between Sutton and Taylor men. The Hurricane and Escape, 1875. On September 15, 1875, a devastating hurricane struck the Texas coast, flattening Indianola. Amid the chaos, Bill Taylor escaped confinement, disappearing into the storm. That December, the feud claimed more lives. Rube Brown, Marshal of Cuero and a Sutton supporter, was assassinated. Later that month, on December 27, 1875, a deadly gunfight erupted in Clinton. When the smoke cleared, Jim Taylor and two of his men lay dead. With Jim's death, the Taylor faction collapsed. The feud that had lasted nearly a decade was finally broken. The aftermath, 1876 and beyond. Though the feud proper had ended, its shadow lingered. On September 19, 1876, Dr. Philip Brassel and his son George were brutally murdered in their Yorktown home. Several Sutton allies were implicated, sparking another series of trials. But justice never truly came. Over 20 years of legal wrangling produced only a single conviction, and even that man was eventually pardoned. By then, the Sutton-Taylor feud had already entered legend. Closing reflection. In total, more than 35 men lost their lives in the feud, though some accounts say the number was far higher. Families were shattered, towns divided, and DeWitt County scarred for generations. The Sutton-Taylor feud was not just a family quarrel. It was a product of its time, a Texas torn apart by war, Reconstruction, and the clash between old Southern ways and new Union authority. And though its leaders lie long buried, the echoes of their gunfire still linger in the history of the Lone Star State. For in Texas, the past was written not only in books, but in blood. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this episode.